Picture this. It's the dead of night, and there's a heavy, terrifying knock at the door. Outside stands Abu Jahl, one of the absolute most ruthless tyrants in all of Makkah, and he is practically trembling with rage. Inside? Well, inside stands a young, heavily pregnant woman, entirely alone. And here's the catch. She knows the greatest secret in all of Arabia at that exact moment, the hiding place of the Prophet Muhammad and her father, Abu Bakr. If she speaks, they die. But if she stays silent, she faces the full wrath of an incredibly violent man. Talk about a life-or-death moment, right? A moment that would quite literally alter the course of history. Welcome to our explainer.
Okay, let's dive into this incredible narrative. Today, we're exploring the life of Asma bint Abi Bakr. Now, you might know her as the daughter of Abu Bakr, the sister of Aisha, or the mother of Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr. But as you'll see today, her greatness, it wasn't just handed to her because of her famous family. No way. It was earned through an entire century of unwavering courage, relentless resilience, and profound, unshakable faith.
So here's a quick roadmap for our explainer today. We're going to track her phenomenal 100-year journey, moving from her early years to her legendary actions during the Hijrah, her fierce stand against tyranny, her incredibly tough life in Medina, her profound wisdom, and finally, how she capped off a literal century of courage. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Early Years and Deep Faith. Growing up in the very first Muslim household. When you really look at the sheer scale of her life, it's staggering. Born almost 3 decades before the migration to Medina, Asma was actually the 18th person to ever accept Islam. She grew up watching this tiny, persecuted community endure severe hardship in Mecca. But her faith? Completely unshakable. And it wasn't just her blindly following her dad. She made an independent, formal pledge to the Prophet, during a time when doing so put a massive, life-threatening target on your back.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Woman of Two Belts and the legendary night of the Hijrah.
So, the year is 622 CE. The leaders of Quraysh have officially decided the Prophet must be killed. But he and Abu Bakr have secretly slipped out of Mecca, hiding out in the Cave of Thawr to escape the assassins. They desperately need food and water to survive the journey. So Asma, who is heavily pregnant at the time, takes on this highly dangerous mission of sneaking supplies to them in the dead of night. When she was packing the provisions, she realized she had no rope to tie the containers. Without even a second thought, she tore her own waist belt, her Nitaqayn, right down the middle, using one half for the food and the other for the water. Because of this brilliant, fast-thinking resourcefulness, she earned a title that is echoed for over 14 centuries. That an-Nitaqayn, the possessor of 2 belts.
And you know what the Prophet did when he saw this? He smiled. He promised her that God would replace her torn belt with 2 belts in paradise. This wasn't just a casual compliment, it was a divine promise of paradise given directly to her for her immense bravery and dedication to the mission.
Which brings us to Section 3, Standing Strong Against Tyranny and her confrontation with Abu Jahl.
Let's circle back to that terrifying hook we started with. The Quraysh discover the Prophet is missing. Abu Jahl rushes over to Abu Bakr's house, pounding on the door, demanding to know where they are. Asma flat out refuses to tell him. Abu Jahl, who's this massive, violent man, is so enraged by her defiance that he slaps her across the face with such brutal force that her earring literally goes flying off. But she doesn't break. This pregnant woman, standing entirely alone, absorbs the blow and stays perfectly silent. She protected the greatest secret in Islamic history right to his face.
All right, Section 4, Hardships and Life in Medina. Because, trust me, her trials were far from over once she migrated. When Asma finally arrived in Medina, she had just given birth to Abdullah, the very first child born to the immigrants after the Hijrah. She was married to al-Zubayr ibn al-Awwam. Now, despite coming from a very wealthy Meccan family, they lived in extreme poverty. No servants, no luxuries. Her grueling daily routine meant grinding date stones for the camel, fetching water from distant wells, kneading dough, and caring for al-Zubayr's horse. She went from immense wealth to completely embracing a life of rigorous, exhausting hardship. And to put that physical toll into perspective, 2 miles. That is the distance she would walk, carrying heavy loads of date pits perfectly balanced on her head, walking from the agricultural lands given by the Prophet all the way back to her home. Just think about that for a second. Her self-reliance and raw physical endurance were simply astounding. On to Section 5, Wisdom, Kindness, and Family, a beautiful balance of faith and compassion.
Now, this is a truly fascinating moment when it comes to interreligious relations. Asma's mother, Qutayla, who was still a polytheist and hadn't accepted Islam, came all the way to Medina to visit her and brought gifts. Keep in mind, tensions between the Muslims and the polytheists of Mecca were extremely high at this time. Asma hesitated. She actually went to the Prophet to ask if she should accept the gifts and host her mother. The Prophet's response was clear and it was beautiful. Yes, keep good relation with her. Her deep faith didn't make her rigid or cruel. Actually, it was the very foundation of her compassion and kindness, even across religious divides.
She took this to heart and applied this immense generosity everywhere. She once asked the Prophet if she should spend from the money her husband brought home, and his advice became her absolute guiding principle. Give and do not hoard. From that moment on, she became renowned for her extreme generosity. Later in life, when she did finally have access to wealth, she totally refused to hoard it. She constantly encouraged her family to give freely, fully trusting that God would provide the rest.
And finally, Section 6, A Century of Courage. This brings us to our final and perhaps most heartbreaking test. Talk about poetic symmetry, right? At the start of this explainer, we saw her as a young, pregnant woman standing up to the tyrant Abu Jahl. Fast forward decades later, she is 100 years old, she has lost her eyesight, but she is standing up to another ruthless tyrant, al-Hajjaj. A full century of life, and that ironclad courage hadn't wavered a single inch.
The context here is incredibly intense. Her son, Abdullah ibn al-Zubayr, who had been ruling as caliph in Mecca, is under a brutal siege by the Umayyad army led by al-Hajjaj. Most of his supporters have totally abandoned him. He knows the end is near, and he goes to his 100-year-old mother to ask for her advice. Should he finally just surrender?
And her response? Absolutely unforgettable. Live with honor and die with honor. Even as a mother facing the imminent death of her beloved son, she refuses to let him bow to humiliation. She tells him, if you are fighting for the truth, you must stand firm to the very end. She was his greatest source of strength, right up until his martyrdom. And when al-Hajjaj later tried to intimidate her, she boldly called him out to his face, telling him that while he may have ruined her son's worldly life, her son had ruined al-Hajjaj's afterlife. Wow.
Asma passed away just days after her son, in the year 73 AH. The physical facts of her 100-year life are almost hard to believe. She lived a full century, and get this, without losing a single tooth. Her intellect remained brilliantly sharp right up to her final breath. She was the very last of the early emigrants, the Muhajirin, to leave this world, taking with her a direct, living connection to the earliest days of Islam.
So, Asma bint Abi Bakr didn't just witness history, she actively shaped it with her bare hands. Whether it was tearing a belt in two to save the Prophet, carrying date stones for miles on end to build a life, or sending her own son into battle to preserve his honor. So, I'm going to leave you with this question. If a single act of courage can echo through 14 centuries, what legacy are you building today? Think about that. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.